Ethan had always considered himself a man of logic, someone who trusted machines more than people. As an engineer, he worked on the small details of space travel, the nuts, bolts, and wires that made everything run smoothly. But today, none of his usual skills seemed to matter. The mission had been straightforward. Travel to a remote alien planet, study its technology, and bring back data. But something had gone terribly wrong. Ethan had been in the control room when the alarms blared. The lights flickered, and the temperature in the facility plummeted. A quick glance at his console confirmed his worst fear. The power grid was failing. Fast. Not now, he muttered under his breath, his fingers flying over the buttons. But no matter what he did, nothing seemed to work. The systems were failing, faster than he could fix them. In moments, the entire station went dark. Silence. His heart raced. The base wasn't just malfunctioning, it was on the verge of collapsing. He had to find a way out. But where? Suddenly, he heard something. A voice. He froze, listening intently. The voice came from behind a thick steel door, barely audible over the hum of the failing power systems. He had no idea who or what it was, but in a moment like this, he had no choice but to investigate. Ethan cautiously approached the door, his hands sweating inside his gloves. He braced himself and pressed his palm to the cold surface. As he slowly opened it, he was hit with a rush of cold air. The hallway beyond was dark, save for a faint blue glow coming from the far end. At the end of the hallway stood a figure, unmistakably alien. The woman was tall, her skin a soft shade of purple, almost iridescent under the dim light. She had striking features, high cheekbones, sharp eyes, and a regal posture that told Ethan she wasn't just any ordinary alien. Her long, silvery hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall. She wasn't wearing a typical spacesuit like him. Instead, her clothing was more flowing, like a gown of sorts, with intricate patterns that shifted with her movements. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan stood still, taking her in, while she studied him with a curious gaze. He had read reports of the species that inhabited this planet, but seeing one up close was entirely different. He had always expected them to be cold, distant, and uninterested in humans. This woman was anything but that. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as she spoke. "You are not supposed to be here," she said, in a calm but commanding voice, her words ringing in the silence like a challenge. Ethan hesitated. "I wasn't supposed to be here either. The station is going down," he explained, his voice rough. "I'm not sure how much time we have." The woman's gaze softened slightly, though she didn't step closer. "I know," she replied. "This is not just your problem. My mission is far more important than I anticipated. The systems here must be repaired. I cannot do it alone." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You need help?" It was hard to imagine someone like her needing help from a human. "Yes. Your technology. It may be primitive, but it might be just what's needed. I don't have the time to explain everything, but we must work together. I will not let this base fail," she said with a sense of finality. Ethan studied her face. There was a fire in her eyes, a determination that he couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the desperation of the moment, or maybe it was the strange pull he felt toward her, but he knew there was no other choice. "I'm Ethan," he said, taking a cautious step forward. "I'll help. Let's get this place back online before we're all trapped." The woman nodded, her eyes glimmering. "Lyra," she said simply, as if her name held weight in a way that made it stand out among the chaos. "Follow me." They moved swiftly through the dark, silent hallways of the base, each step heavier than the last. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on Lyra as she led the way, her presence commanding the space around her. Despite her calm demeanor, there was a certain tension in the air, as if the fate of the entire planet rested on their shoulders. As they reached the central control room, Lyra's fingers danced over the ancient-looking alien console. The blue lights flickered in response, but nothing seemed to stabilize the power grid. "It's not enough," Lyra murmured under her breath, clearly frustrated. Ethan could tell she was trying to hide it, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. He stepped up beside her, eyeing the screen. I might have an idea. Let me try something. Lyra stepped aside, watching him closely as he began working on the console. He quickly linked his tablet to the alien system, bypassing several failed connections. The interface was clunky, but he could tell that if they didn't act fast, everything would go dark for good. Almost there, he said as his fingers flew over the controls. The screen blinked, shifted, and then, finally, the lights returned. They both stood in the glow of the revived system, breathing a sigh of relief. Lyra's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Respect, perhaps. You've done well, human, she said, her tone still formal, but warmer than before. We still have much to do, but for now, we are not lost. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He felt an odd sense of pride, even though he had just helped fix a failing power system. But it wasn't the technology that lingered in his mind, it was Lyra. There was something about her, something captivating that he couldn't quite place. He was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, this was more than just a simple mission. But that would have to wait. They were still locked in. And the night was far from over. The central control room buzzed with the hum of the revived power systems. Ethan wiped his hands on his pants, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. But there was no time to relax. The job wasn't done, and the base was still in danger of collapsing if they didn't act fast. Lyra stood at the console, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The blue lights flickered again, but this time they remained steady. She glanced at Ethan, her expression neutral, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Appreciation, maybe. You've done well, she said, her voice cool but not unkind. But we have only just begun. Ethan nodded, looking around the room. The controls were alien, but he could see enough to know that they were working with a complicated system, one that was far beyond anything humanity had ever built. It was going to take everything he had to keep things running long enough for them to escape. So what's next? He asked, trying to push the nerves out of his voice. We fixed the power, but there's still the matter of getting out of here. Lyra glanced at him, her face unreadable. For a moment she said nothing. Then, almost as if deciding something in her mind, she spoke. You have to understand. This station was never meant for your kind, she began, her voice steady. It was built to serve my people. The systems here are ancient, designed to protect what is buried deep within the planet. A power greater than anything you've ever seen. But now, the power is failing. And if it dies, everything dies with it. Ethan frowned. He hadn't expected her to say anything like that. What are you talking about? What's buried here? What do you mean by everything? Lyra's eyes narrowed as if she was debating whether or not to trust him with the truth. For a moment, the room felt unnaturally quiet, and Ethan felt the weight of her gaze. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now. It's an artifact, she said. An ancient power source that was discovered by my people centuries ago. We were meant to protect it, to keep it hidden. But now, the station's systems are unstable, and if the artifact is disturbed, it could mean the end for both of our species. Ethan stared at her. Wait, you're saying this place isn't just some science outpost? There's something here that could endanger everyone? Yes, Lyra replied, her voice low. The artifact is powerful, more than you can imagine. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could destroy entire worlds. The gravity of her words hung in the air. Ethan felt his heart race. This wasn't just about fixing a broken power grid. This was something far bigger than that. They weren't just fighting to save themselves. They were fighting for the fate of two species. Lyra turned back to the control panel, her brow furrowed in concentration. I've spent years studying this artifact, trying to find a way to stabilize it. But now it's all falling apart. If we don't get to it soon, it could trigger a chain reaction that will wipe out everything on this planet. Ethan stepped closer, his mind racing. So what's the plan? How do we fix this? Lyra hesitated. We need to reach the core of the station. That's where the artifact is stored, but it's heavily protected. The station's security systems are designed to keep anyone, especially humans, away from it. Ethan could feel the tension building in the room. This wasn't just a simple escape anymore. They were in the middle of something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not leaving here until I know we're both safe." Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he had said the wrong thing. But then she nodded. "Good, we'll need all the help we can get." She motioned for him to follow her. "We're running out of time." They moved quickly through the dimly lit halls of the facility, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The air was thick with tension, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every corner felt like a trap. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. He kept his hand on the blaster at his side, ready for anything. As they approached the main elevator shaft, Lyra stopped. She glanced around, then turned to Ethan. "The security systems will be active on the lower levels. We'll have to bypass them." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You can do that?" Lyra gave him a half smile. "I can, but it won't be easy." The two of them crouched by the elevator controls, Lyra quickly tapping into the system with a device she pulled from her belt. Ethan watched as she worked, her fingers moving with incredible speed and precision. "I've been trained for situations like this," she said, her voice calm as ever. "You may be a human, but you're resourceful. I have no doubt you'll be able to help me when we reach the artifact." Ethan didn't respond right away. He had no idea what kind of help he could offer in a situation like this, but he wasn't about to back down. If Lyra was going to risk everything for this mission, he would do the same. Suddenly, there was a soft beep and the elevator doors slid open. They were one step closer. As they descended into the depths of the station, the air grew colder and the lights flickered. Ethan couldn't help but feel a growing unease. What were they really walking into? What was waiting for them at the heart of this place? He stole a glance at Lyra. She seemed unbothered, her eyes fixed ahead, her face as composed as ever. But there was something else there now, a hint of uncertainty, a crack in her confidence that Ethan hadn't noticed before. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Lyra met his gaze, her expression softening for the first time since they had met. "I don't know," she said, almost to herself, "but I'll do what I have to." The elevator continued its descent, and the deeper they went, the more the silence grew. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, each thump echoing in the confined space. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: he wasn't leaving without Lyra. And the more he learned about her, the more he realized that this mission wasn't just about saving the station or even the planet. It was about something far more personal. It was about them. The elevator came to a soft stop, and the doors slid open with a hiss. The air was thick with tension, colder than before, as if the station itself was holding its breath. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. This was the heart of the base, the place where everything had started. Lyra stepped out first, her movements graceful yet cautious. Ethan followed closely behind, scanning the dimly lit hallway for any signs of movement. The space felt abandoned, but the silence was unsettling. He could feel his pulse quicken as they made their way deeper into the station, the walls growing more alien the further they went. Lyra led the way, her face focused and determined. Every so often she would glance over her shoulder at Ethan, her eyes sharp, but there was a quiet sadness in them now. The further they walked, the more Ethan could sense that this mission wasn't just a duty to her. It was personal. She wasn't just trying to save her people. She was trying to redeem something for herself. He couldn't quite place it, but there was something in the way she moved that told him this mission had been a burden on her for far longer than she was willing to admit. The hallway ended in a large, open chamber. The walls were lined with glowing blue symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal, was the artifact. It was beautiful, smooth, dark, and circular, with intricate designs carved into its surface. The moment Ethan laid eyes on it, He could feel the power radiating from it, almost like it was alive, humming with an energy that seemed to vibrate through the air. Lyra stopped a few paces away from the pedestal, her eyes fixed on the artifact. "This is it," she said quietly, almost reverently. "This is what we came for." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the artifact. "What does it do?" he asked, his voice low, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the ancient power it held. "It's a source of energy," Lyra replied, her tone distant. "A power that can change everything. If it's used properly, it can save my people. But if it falls into the wrong hands..." She trailed off, her eyes darkening. Ethan turned to look at her. "And you think someone's after it?" She nodded, her face hardening. "I don't know, but I've been sent to protect it, and now I'm not sure anyone can be trusted with it. Not even me." Ethan didn't say anything at first. He could tell that the weight of her words was sinking in. There was more to this mission than Lyra had let on, and he was beginning to realize how much of a personal struggle it had become for her. The room around them seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening. Ethan stepped forward, glancing at the glowing pedestal. It was like the artifact was calling to him, pulling at him in ways he didn't understand. He knew that it was dangerous, but something inside him urged him to reach out, to touch it. Lyra stepped forward quickly, grabbing his arm. "Don't touch it," she warned. "Not yet." Ethan looked at her, confused. "Why not?" "There are security measures in place," Lyra said, her voice tense. "If you touch it without authorization, it will trigger a failsafe. The entire base will lock down and we'll be trapped." Ethan pulled back, nodding slowly. He hadn't even thought of that. "So how do we get it out of here?" Lyra was silent for a moment, her eyes never leaving the artifact. "We can't just take it. It needs to be deactivated first. There's a command code hidden in the system, something only a few of us know. I was trained to access it, but..." "But what?" Ethan asked, sensing her hesitation. Lyra turned to face him. "But I don't know if I can do it anymore. The command code. It's locked inside my mind, but I haven't accessed it in years. I'm afraid I won't be able to recall it in time." Ethan's heart sank. He knew they didn't have much time. The station was still failing, and every moment they spent here brought them closer to danger. "Lyra, we have to try. We don't have another choice." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. For a moment it felt like she was going to turn away, to abandon the mission altogether. But then something changed. Her gaze softened and she took a deep breath. "All right," she said, her voice steady again. "I'll try, but you need to stay focused. You can't let anything distract you." Ethan nodded, his resolve firming. "I won't." Lyra moved to the side of the room and placed her hands on a hidden control panel embedded in the wall. Series of lights flickered on, and the room hummed with the sound of machines coming to life. She closed her eyes, her fingers moving over the panel in a practiced rhythm. Ethan watched her, his thoughts racing. They were so close to the artifact, to the very thing that could save everything. But Lyra was right. There was more at stake, here than just them. They had to be careful. Every decision could change the fate of both their worlds. A few minutes passed in tense silence. Lyra's breathing was steady, but Ethan could see the strain in her face. She was struggling, trying to recall the code that could deactivate the failsafe. Ethan stayed quiet, watching her every move, ready to help if needed. But for now it was all up to her. Finally, Lyra's eyes opened and she spoke the words that made the lights flicker even brighter. The security systems around the room started to whir as if responding to her command. The pedestal hummed, and the artifact began to glow softly. "It's working," Lyra said, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We have access." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "We're not out of the woods yet." Lyra nodded, her gaze still fixed on the artifact. "We still have to deactivate the last layer of security. It will take time." Ethan glanced at her, feeling the pressure mounting. They weren't alone in this facility, and if anyone else was nearby, someone who meant them harm, they had no time to waste. As Lyra continued to work, Ethan stepped closer, his hand hovering over the artifact once more. He wasn't sure why, but he felt drawn to it, as if it held the answers to everything. As he reached out, he caught Lyra's eye, and for a moment he saw a flash of something. Fear? Regret? He wasn't sure. "Don't," she said softly, and for the first time there was a tremble in her voice. Ethan stopped, his hand inches away from the artifact. There was something in the air now, something different. They were on the edge of something huge, something that could change everything. But for better or worse, only time would tell. The room hummed with the soft, steady sound of machines working, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Ethan stood a few steps behind Lyra, watching as she carefully typed commands into the control panel. Her fingers moved quickly, her face set in concentration, but there was something about her posture, something tight in her shoulders, that made him wonder if she was as calm as she seemed. "Almost there," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan could hear the strain in her words, though she tried to hide it. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his own nerves. They were so close now. The artifact was only a few feet away, still glowing softly on its pedestal. The station around them was barely holding together, but they had a chance. They just needed to finish this. Ethan shifted his weight, glancing around the room. The walls seemed to press in on them, and the dim lights flickered as if warning them that time was running out. He knew that Lyra was doing everything she could, but the feeling that they were being watched still lingered like a shadow in the corner of his mind. "Do you think anyone else is here?" Ethan asked, his voice low, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Lyra didn't look up from the panel, but her lips tightened slightly. "I don't know," she replied. "I've been tracking the station's systems for months. If anyone is here, they've been hiding from me." She paused, then added, "But I wouldn't be surprised if someone else came looking for the artifact. It's far too powerful to be left alone." Ethan glanced back at the artifact. He had always known that this mission was important, but now, standing here in the heart of the station, he realized just how critical it was. This wasn't just a scientific discovery. It was the key to everything. "Okay, it's done," Lyra said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. She straightened up, and for the first time since they had started, a small smile appeared on her face. "The security is disabled. We can move it now." Relief washed over Ethan, but it was short-lived. As Lyra moved toward the pedestal, the room suddenly shook, the ground beneath their feet rumbling as if the entire station was starting to collapse. Ethan grabbed the nearest wall for support, his heart racing. The lights flickered again, this time more violently. "What's happening?" he shouted over the noise, his voice rising in panic. Lyra's face hardened. "The fail-safe systems must have triggered," she said, her voice grim. "The station is self-destructing. We don't have much time." Ethan's stomach dropped. "How long do we have?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. She was already moving toward the artifact, her expression focused, as if she had expected this to happen. She reached the pedestal and gently placed her hands on the artifact. "Lyra," Ethan called, his voice frantic. "We need to get out of here." But Lyra didn't seem to hear him. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as if gathering her strength. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The station was falling apart, and they were stuck here, with the only way out being through the chaos. The artifact was powerful, he could feel it. But it was also dangerous, and now with the station self-destructing, they were on the clock. "Lyra, please," Ethan said again, stepping closer, his hand reaching out to touch her shoulder. But she flinched away from him, her eyes snapping open. "I can't leave yet," she said, her voice almost pleading. "This artifact, it's the only chance my people have. I have to make sure it's secured." Ethan took a step back, his mind racing. He understood her need to protect her people, but they couldn't stay here. They were both risking their lives for something they didn't fully understand. "We don't have time for this," Ethan said, his voice sharp with urgency. "The station is going to explode. We need to go now." Lyra looked at him for a long moment. her eyes searching his face as if weighing her options. Then, without another word, she turned and grabbed the artifact. It was heavier than it looked, and she struggled for a moment before finally securing it under her arm. "Let's go," she said, her voice flat and determined. Without waiting for a response, she started moving toward the door. Ethan followed, closely behind her, his heart pounding in his chest. The ground shook again, this time stronger, and the sound of metal creaking echoed through the halls. The station was falling apart faster than they had anticipated. They ran through the narrow corridors, their footsteps pounding on the metal floor. The lights above flickered, casting long, eerie shadows along the walls. Ethan's breath came in short bursts, his legs burning from the effort. He wasn't used to this kind of pace, but he had no choice but to keep up. "We're almost there," Lyra called over her shoulder, her voice strained but steady. "The escape pod is just ahead." Ethan nodded, but his mind was racing. The escape pod wasn't far, but he had no idea if they could make it in time. The station's collapse was becoming more violent by the second. The walls were cracking, and debris began to fall from the ceiling. The air felt thick with smoke and dust, and the noise was deafening. Every step felt like it could be their last. Finally, they reached the escape pod. Lyra quickly input the coordinates, and the doors hissed open. They both rushed inside, and Lyra slammed the door shut behind them. The pod's engines roared to life, and the whole station seemed to shake one last time. "Hold on," Lyra said, her voice steady even though her eyes were filled with determination. "This is going to be a rough ride." The pod shot away from the station, its engines firing as the station's destruction reached its peak. Ethan watched through the small window as the station behind them erupted in a brilliant flash of light, the shockwave pushing the pod forward. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, as the dust settled and the pod coasted away from the remains of the base, Ethan let out a shaky breath. They had made it. Lyra was sitting beside him, her face pale but calm. She was holding the artifact tightly as if it were the only thing that mattered now. "Is it over?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet. Lyra glanced at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and something else, something he couldn't quite understand. "For now," she said softly. "But this is only the beginning." The escape pod drifted silently through space, the hum of the engines the only sound in the cramped, dimly lit cabin. Ethan stared out of the small viewport, watching the wreckage of the station slowly fade into the distance. The explosion had been massive, and though the station was no more, the shockwaves of its destruction still rippled through the void of space. The darkness beyond seemed endless, and Ethan felt a strange sense of emptiness settle over him. "We made it," he whispered, though it didn't feel like a victory. They had escaped, but at what cost? Lyra sat beside him, her hand still gripping the artifact tightly. Her eyes were fixed ahead, her face expressionless. She hadn't said much since they had boarded the pod. Ethan could tell she was deep in thought, her mind still back at the station, perhaps processing everything that had happened. "Lyra," Ethan said softly, breaking the silence. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond right away. Her eyes shifted toward him, her expression unreadable. Then, with a heavy sigh, she looked back out of the viewport. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I should feel relieved. The station's gone, and the artifact is safe. But I can't help but feel like we've only delayed the inevitable." Ethan frowned, not understanding. "Delayed what?" Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and uncertainty. "The power of the artifact is more than just energy. It's a force that has been shaping the fate of my people for centuries. It can either save us or it can destroy us. I've spent my life trying to understand it, and now I wonder if anyone should have ever had it in the first place." Ethan's heart tightened. He had always known the artifact was important, but hearing it from Lyra, he could see how deeply it troubled her. This wasn't just a mission for her. It was personal, as if she were carrying the weight of her entire species on her shoulders. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice filled with empathy. "I didn't realize it was so complicated." Lyra didn't respond right away. She looked down at the artifact, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface. "Neither did I," she said softly. "I thought I understood it. Thought I knew what had to be done. But now, I'm not so sure." The silence between them stretched on, both of them lost in their thoughts. Ethan couldn't help but wonder what it must feel like for her. This alien woman, so far from her home, carrying such an immense burden. He had only known her for a short time, but already, he could see how much she had sacrificed for her people. Finally, Lyra broke the silence again. "You know, I wasn't supposed to be here. I was assigned to this mission because of my position, but I never wanted to be the one to carry the artifact. I thought someone else, someone stronger, would be the one to protect it. But it's mine now, and I'm not sure I'm strong enough." Ethan could hear the vulnerability in her voice, something he hadn't expected from the calm, confident woman he had come to know. He knew it took a lot for her to admit that, and it made him feel even more connected to her. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said, his voice firm. "We're in this together. I'm not leaving you, Lyra." Lyra turned to look at him, her eyes softening slightly. There was a flicker of something, maybe hope, maybe relief, before she nodded. "I don't think I ever believed that anyone could truly understand what this feels like. But you're different. You've shown me that there's more to this than just duty. Maybe there's something more to all of this than I realized." Ethan smiled gently, relieved to see her open up even just a little. "We'll figure it out together." Lyra's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she looked away, back out at the stars. She was still lost in her thoughts, but there was a sense of peace about her now, a quiet understanding between them. The pod continued to drift through space, the vastness of the universe stretching out before them. They didn't know what awaited them, but for the first time since they had met, Ethan felt a sense of calm. They had survived the explosion, and now they had to face whatever came next. After a long pause, Lyra spoke again, her voice calm, but tinged with a new resolve. "I think it's time we head to the nearest starbase. We need to figure out what to do with the artifact. I can't keep running from it forever." Ethan nodded, his hands steady on the controls. "I agree. We'll find a place to lay low, gather information, and make a plan. But no matter what happens, I'm with you." Lyra didn't say anything for a while, but Ethan could see the faintest hint of a smile tug at her lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time, Ethan felt like they weren't just strangers thrown together by chance. They were a team, and as strange as it seemed, he felt like they were connected by something deeper than the mission. The pod continued on its journey, the stars outside growing brighter as they approached the nearest starbase. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they had each other, and for now that was enough. The journey to the starbase was quiet. The vastness of space seemed to stretch endlessly before them, a cold, indifferent sea of stars. Ethan sat at the controls of the escape pod, occasionally glancing at Lyra, who was once again lost in her thoughts, her eyes fixed on the window. The silence between them had settled into a comfortable, understanding quiet. There was no more need for words. Both of them knew the weight of what they had experienced. The pod's systems were running smoothly, and the steady hum of the engines was a comforting presence in the otherwise still cabin. The artifact sat securely beside Lyra, its dark, smooth surface gleaming faintly in the soft light of the pod. It was still just as mysterious, still as powerful as ever, but now it didn't feel as threatening. Ethan could sense that the closer they got to the starbase, the more Lyra seemed to come to terms with the burden she carried. After hours of silence, Lyra finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "We'll have to be careful when we get there," she said, her eyes still on the distant stars. "The artifact, it's not something that can be trusted with just anyone. We need to find a way to keep it safe, a place where it can't hurt anyone." Ethan nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. "We'll figure it out. No one else needs to know what it really is. We can keep it between us." Lyra turned her head, meeting his eyes. For the first time, her gaze wasn't full of doubt. It was filled with a quiet trust that made Ethan's chest tighten. I never thought I could trust anyone with this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But now I think you're the only one who truly understands. Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through him at her words. He had always prided himself on his ability to think logically, to solve problems with a clear mind, but with Lyra, things were different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about fixing a broken power grid or escaping a crumbling station. This was about a connection, something that had formed between them in the heat of danger and uncertainty. "We're in this together," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Lyra didn't say anything at first. She simply nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Ethan to see that she was starting to believe in the possibility of a future beyond the chaos. A future where they could find peace, where they could choose their own path free from the weight of their responsibilities. The starbase came into view as they neared the outer rim of the system. It was a large station, bustling with activity, its lights twinkling in the distance like a beacon of hope. For the first time in days, Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him. They were safe. They had made it. "We'll land there, figure out our next move, and take it from there," Lyra said, her voice more assured now. Ethan glanced at her. "Agreed. We'll lay low for a while, get some information, and then decide what to do with the artifact." As they approached the docking bay, the pod's thrusters kicked in, slowing their descent. The station's security systems buzzed to life, communicating with the pod's controls. Ethan quickly sent the landing coordinates and the pod descended gently toward the bay. They touched down with a soft thud, the landing gear making contact with the metal floor of the starbase. The moment the pod's engines powered down, the quiet of space seemed to return. Ethan and Lyra exchanged a glance, both of them feeling the weight of the moment. They had survived. They had made it through the worst of it. But now they were at the beginning of something new. Whatever that something was, they would have to face it together. Lyra stood up and moved toward the exit. "I'll handle the docking procedure," she said, her tone more confident now. She had taken control, something Ethan hadn't seen her do so freely until now. "You stay with the artifact." Ethan nodded, understanding the need for caution. He could sense how protective Lyra had become of the artifact. It was clear she wasn't willing to trust anyone, not yet. As Lyra activated the airlock, Ethan turned his attention to the artifact. He didn't fully understand its power, but he could feel its weight, the weight of everything it represented. It wasn't just a relic of an ancient civilization. It was a symbol of hope, of survival, and of the future, but it was also a weapon, one that could either save or destroy. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Lyra stepped out first, her posture confident as she led the way. Ethan followed closely behind, the artifact still in his hands. They moved through the bustling corridors of the starbase, passing crew members and workers, none of whom paid them much attention. But as they walked, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The station was large and they were small, just two individuals in the middle of a much larger world. They reached a quiet area near the back of the starbase, away from the main traffic. Lyra stopped in front of a small unmarked door and keyed in a security code. The door slid open, revealing a small private room. "This will do," Lyra said, stepping inside. She motioned for Ethan to follow. "We can lay low here for a while." Ethan stepped into the room, setting the artifact down on the table in the center. He watched as Lyra locked the door behind them, her eyes scanning the room before she turned back to him. "We can rest for now," she said, her voice softer than before. "But tomorrow we need to start planning." Ethan nodded, his exhaustion catching up with him. He had been running on adrenaline for days, but now, with the mission complete and the artifact safe, for now, he could feel the weight of everything starting to settle in. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice steady despite the weariness in his bones. "One step at a time." Lyra gave him a small smile, the first real one he had seen from her since they had met. "Yes," she said. One step at a time. And for the first time since this journey had begun, Ethan felt a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but with Lyra by his side, he knew they could face it, together.